So I'm asked so many times to tell my story, but my story is so incredibly expansive, I never know where to start. Well, today we're going to start at the beginning.
Disability Life TV is sponsored by Connor Dental Associates.
Hello everyone, my name is Yvette Pegues and I'm your host today for Disability Life TV. I'm also your guest today. When I said it's on me, when I said that we would be talking about a singular issue, that singular issue happens to be me. So today I'm looking in the mirror and looking at you to speak about a specific issue and a specific part of my life. There are so many things that have happened in my life since my traumatic brain and spinal cord injury. I don't always know where to start when someone says, come on in and tell your story. Well, my story is a journey. It's a marathon. It continues. But what I'd like to focus on today is my book, The Art of Adaptability. Now, this is the second publication. The first, if you'll remember, was the one that was published by my children. At the time, Isaiah and Elijah were age 5 and 7. Their book is called My Mommy Had Brain Surgery and I'm Okay. We had never thought about writing a book, but we understand that a legacy of literature is something that can be passed on through generations. It's important to me for several reasons, and we'll talk about that later. But first, let's talk about the art of adaptability. What is adapting? Do you have to be disabled to adapt? Absolutely not. We adapt every single day. Adaptation is about change. It's about living in a new normal. What was my new normal? Most of you know, but I'd like to go into just a little bit of detail. The reason why the detail is important today is because you too have a story. You too have something that someone else needs to hear. It's almost as if your situations and your circumstances don't belong to you. They belong to the person who hears the story and who can benefit the story. So you may ask, what is my story? Lots of stories, but the one in this book today is especially about me being talked off of a ledge. So when I got diagnosed with Arnold-Chiari malformation 4 years ago, we had not ever heard of it. In fact, most people that I speak with, including the medical community, still don't know what it is, but I live with it. And what we had to decide in that moment is how we were going to move forward. How are we going to parent? How are we going to live and be a couple, a married couple, now a decade into our marriage, and deal with this difference? Because when I went into surgery and decided to have this decompression surgery where they literally cut into my brain, took pieces of my spine out, and the expectation was that I would walk out. But obviously, due to this beautiful chair I'm in, I never did. So how do you deal with that change? Honestly, my husband prayed for life or death. We never thought there'd be a gray area. We never thought there would be an other. Well, the other is disability, and it's a great possibility whenever you are challenged with a new diagnosis or a disability. I will tell you, we were in denial for at least a year or so. We just knew that we would get back up and go back to our normal. We didn't realize or understand that we needed a new normal. So the importance of this book is that it was my journal. It was the way that I kept myself from losing my mind. I was at doctor's appointments. I was at post-op appointments. I saw many different doctors for many different specialties because, you see, I am not just in a wheelchair. I have multiple disabilities, multiple injuries as a result of my condition, which I was born with. It is genetic and inherited, but it's also a result of the correction process. So I don't want to scare you. Not everyone who goes into surgery comes out in a wheelchair. That was just my situation. And so let me tell you what I did. The doctor walked in. He gave me my diagnosis. It was pretty critical. He had 5 minutes, so he had to cover all the bases. What I did was I cried for 5 minutes. I prayed for 10 minutes, and then I wrote for about 15 minutes every single time. Trust, I did not expect that what I wrote or even what I experienced would become a book. But I knew that bibliotherapy, I know it now, but I didn't know then, that bibliotherapy, writing things down, making sure that you're in the moment when you are scribing in your situation so that you can go back and not only see how much better you've been, maybe even how much worse you've gotten, but you have a catalog of events that takes you through the process. So you're not internalizing it and it doesn't become an additional condition or disease or cancer that's eating you from the inside out. So journaling, if it's not something you already do, whether you do it electronically or otherwise, I don't recommend that you do it through social media. It doesn't really give you the expansive opportunity to write down your feelings. You can type it, obviously. You can even blog it. But those intimate feelings and ideas that you have or thoughts that keep you up at night, keep a pen and a piece of paper next to your bed. It may be your next book. In my case, I had to understand, what should I have done? So this workbook is actually what I would have done differently. It's my 2020, if you will. So had I had my injury today and had the opportunity to read this book ahead of time or as I was going through the process, there are so many things that have to be done. They must be done within the first 30, 60, and 90 days of a disability and a diagnosis. Now, that is not to eliminate those of you who are watching or those you know who have already been diagnosed, that they've been living in a fog, if you will, or without answers to questions. This book is also good for medical professionals. How do you deal with someone from a place of their own personal experience? Bedside manner can greatly be improved by this book. We also have groups, support groups, that use this book, and families, because it is a journey. There are many places for you to write down your thoughts, your feelings, and your ideas. There's even a stopping point in this book. So after the break, we're going to talk a little bit more about the 4 4s for newly disabled and diagnosed persons. What are the 4 4s? Who even came up with 4? Why 4, not 3? These are the 4 that I personally experienced, and my husband, being a hammer and our issue being a nail, was very appreciative because he was able to go through this book and very clearly understand what's next. What are my steps? How do I do this? I can hug my wife. I can hold my wife. I can support my wife. But as the leader of our home, as our headship, he wanted to do something. He needed something tangible, but he was lost. And we could not find at the time anything on the market that specifically spoke with what to do next. Those of you who are parents, did you get a book after your child was born saying, this is how you parent. These are the steps you take if, when, and how. Not to say there aren't great books about parenting, but much like becoming a brand new parent, the question that I had with my firstborn child is, oh my goodness, what do I do with this perfect little being? I don't want to break it. So after the break, we'll talk about what to do within the first 30, 60, and 90 days of a newly diagnosed disability. But this is a really important part of the show because we need to thank our sponsors. So if you'll hold on tight, I'll be right back once we thank our sponsors.
Connor Dental Associates, full-service dentistry, providing orthodontics, implants, laser dentistry, and general care, set in a calm and relaxing environment. Our experienced dentist and staff are here to maintain your dental health, improve your appearance and quality of life. Compassionate, professional, and informative. Ask about our core whitening system, servicing insured and non-insured patients of all ages. Located in Kennesaw, near I-75. Call today and experience the difference for yourself.
Welcome back, and I'd like to share a personal thanks to Connor Dental and Associates, our very newest and most wonderful sponsors. If you'd like to advertise with us, feel free to contact us at www.disabilitylife.tv. Before the break, we talked about the book. And what are the 4 4s for newly disabled and diagnosed persons? Don't ask. I have no idea why I came up with 4. I didn't have a formula. I just knew that there were things that we needed to do, things that we had to do. Disability is a business, ladies and gentlemen. There are doctors, there are nurses, there are hospitals and rehabilitation centers, not to say that each and every one of them don't have their purpose. But I will tell you very honestly, and I'm trying to be as clear and as honest as possible, that having 2 incomes, both of which were from IT skill sets, and having 6-figure income in a beautiful home, we literally went from making 6 figures to owing 6 figures. How do you manage? How do you take this pile of bills and invoices because of your ongoing hospitalizations and disabilities? Well, there's a few things. Now, the book introduces more than just what to do, but what is disability? It literally tells you the history of disability. What does handicap mean? It literally means a hand in cap. And that word is no longer being used, but it represents begging, if you will. So that word was taken out of the disability community vocabulary because it was insulting to most, if not all. Now, you will notice there are still the universal signs that you see in parking garages and parking spaces that says handicap accessible. Hopefully we'll work on that after 25 years of signing the Americans with Disabilities Act. But until then, know your history. Also know the language. Becoming disabled mid-life really did feel like moving to another country. We had to learn a whole new language. So recognize some of the things that are required to be able to adapt in your new normal. So those things are very clearly stated in the first part of the book. But what we're going to focus on today are the 4 4s for newly disabled and diagnosed persons. It was important for me to have a cover that reflected that, but also the back cover also reflected what is disability, what does it look like? Now, when I roll into a room in my wheelchair, it's pretty obvious that I have at least one disability, but only 15% of disabilities are visible. Yes, that's right. 75% of the people with disabilities are your neighbors, your friends, your family members, and 4 out of 6 people experience disability either personally or a direct family member. Direct meaning a husband, a wife, a child, or a parent. And more than likely, they are in the same household. And what I'd like to say before I go into too much more detail is, disability doesn't just affect the person with the disease. I'm going to say that again. Disability does not only affect the person with the disease, the entire family and the sociography of that unit requires treatment and care. Protect your relationships. We'll get into that more. So the book, as I mentioned, breaks into different pieces. I'm going to skip forward and go into the 4 4s because people always want to know, well, what are the 4 4s? 4-1. For the survivor. Why is that so important? Don't lose your identity. Don't forget who you are, who you were, what you did, and the importance of those things. It sounds like a simple request, but remember, if you're walking into these doctor's offices and hospital rooms and they're telling you what you've become and you forget who you were and who you're capable of being, then you will be lost in a place that is very difficult to recover from. I went there because I had lost my identity to the point where I had to actually create index cards reminding me of who I was, what I did, what my purpose was. As simple as it sounds, there are very clear instructions in the book on how to discuss that. Next, for your family. Now, why is that important? Well, there's several types of disabilities. You have a temporary disability, you have a permanent disability, and then you have what you call a prognosis. And what the prognosis does is it gives you a length of time or a window of time where you will be incapacitated. In my case, ladies and gentlemen, I had no prognosis. I had a diagnosis, but no one really knew if I would walk again, if I'd function again, if I would be able to speak again, because yes, it's ironic that I'm sitting on a talk show. When my diagnosis was to never speak again, to never have functionality of the left side of my brain because of a 2-quadrant damage on my cognitive side. And we'll talk about some things on that issue. But for your family really does focus on how long does your family member need to stay with you? Do they need to buy a house nearby? Do they need to make plans for your care? The other thing that's really important in that category is to protect your relationships. As simple as it sounds, imagine, if you will, a 20 to 30-year-old now having to move back into her mother's house because she has a disability. Now, what is that mother's responsibility to her adult child? Does she now take on the responsibility of nurturing and mothering as if you were an infant? Does that really respect your situation? It doesn't. And your mother is your mother. Your husband is your husband. Your children are your children, not your caregivers. Because you can get lost in someone who loves you, caring for you, and becoming who you are and forgetting who they are. Because we look up to our caregivers and friends and families to be better, to be bigger, to walk their own path, and we walk our own. An example of that is if I have a curb cut, I take the curb cut, my children take the stairs. They have their experience, and they continue to live their experience, and I continue to live mine. So protect your relationships and recognize that a third person needs to come in and possibly provide care for you, to give that family member respite. You don't want to burn them out too quickly. And again, if you know for how long, then that will also help you. And it also leads me to 4-3. For how long? That has been the biggest barrier in our lives because we don't know. We really don't know. And so I think what happened in my particular situation, because we didn't have any nearby family members, my husband felt there's got to be an end game. There's got to be a time when she becomes autonomous, to be able to bathe myself and toilet myself and clothe myself. I'm getting better, but it's not my diagnosis. It's not expected. In fact, there are things that are breaking that have nothing to do with my brain or spine because, of course, my brain is the center. It tells every other part of my body what to do. And if it's not working and it's not sending the right messages and there are broken circuits, then my body is not responding in the way that it should. So sometimes there are new conditions that come up that have nothing to do with my original diagnosis. So how do you protect your relationships and give a diagnosis as to how long? There's more about that in the book. The final 4-4, as simple as it sounds, you've heard it 100 times, but forgive. My condition is inherited, and I received my diagnosis 2 years after my mother passed away. That's important in this case because it's genetically passed down from a mother to her girl child. Let me just say I have 2 boys. So we're feeling pretty good, but we will still get our children checked. But how do I forgive someone who's not even here? Do I have a reason to forgive her? Should I blame her? Did she know? Well, based on my childhood, I would have to say she didn't. And there were 3 things that I had that she didn't. I had a diagnosis, I had a husband, and I had Jesus. So the way that I was able to live through my disability was very different than the experience I had watching my mother. And I will say for sure that once I received the diagnosis and I received the habits and the triggers for my condition, my mother went from being a villain to a victor. Her behavior, her attitudes, her responses were triggered by pain. The pain I feel every single day, the chronic pain that will never go away because my condition has no cure. It's degenerative, which means it gets worse every single year. So, I love that I never blamed my mother, but I'm really excited to know, and it's important for us to go into great detail about forgiving. Another example is, what if you got hit by a car? Do you hold that pain and hurt and the damage against a total stranger or maybe someone you even know? What if it's abuse related? Forgiveness is medicine, or it's toxic. So as we close out on this book, I would invite you to visit the link below, visit our website, but learn more about the 4-4s for newly disabled and diagnosed persons, not just for yourself, but to understand others. And when I was initially diagnosed with this 1 in a million condition, I just knew there's no way I could minister to anyone or share with anyone or help anyone, because who has this disease? But we all understand one thing, and we have this in common. We understand pain. Regardless of the source of the pain, regardless of how long it lasts, coming from a place of pain to purpose, or pain to pearls, and taking and understanding what you have and making the very best of that, that's a common language that we all speak. So I'm really excited to know that this book is available, and it's available not just to you and I, but to anyone who has a newly diagnosed disability or loves someone in that position. So our D-Life Diamond, as you know, is just one nugget, one jewel that you take from today's episode. I took This was scary at first. Being here before you with no one next to me was a little scary at first. But I recognized that honesty, trust, education, and mercy are the things we can take with us into any situation. And I trust that you will tune in again. I love you for watching, and thank you so much for subscribing to Disability Life TV.